I still remember the way my fingers shook as I closed the door to my tiny apartment that night. $10. That was all I had in my purse. 10 wrinkled dollars to face the world with. To gamble on hope with. To see if maybe, just maybe, my life could be something more than endless bills and empty cupboards. Most people wouldn't think twice about $10. They'd spend it on coffee, on a cab ride, on something they'd forget about in an hour. But for me, $10 felt like a test. A test of whether I had the courage to show up, sit down, and believe that I could belong, even if I knew deep down that I didn't. I had never been on a blind date before. Honestly, I'd never really dated at all, not since high school. Life had been too busy, too hard. My father passed away when I was 17, and my mother's health had crumbled soon after. I had become the breadwinner, the nurse, the everything. Between part-time shifts at the diner and late nights at the grocery store, I didn't have the energy or the courage to let anyone in. But then, loneliness does strange things. My coworker had pushed me to sign up for a dating app. "Everyone does it these days," she'd said. "You need to live a little. You're too young to bury yourself in work and sadness." So, against my better judgment, I signed up. I didn't expect much. I wasn't glamorous like the girls with glossy hair and expensive clothes. I didn't take weekend trips or post pictures in designer outfits. My photos were simple. Me in my thrift store dress, smiling awkwardly, trying to hide the circles under my eyes. And then one evening, a message appeared. His name was Michael. He was charming in that practiced way people on apps often are. Polite, a little too smooth, but not creepy. He said he admired my smile, asked if I'd like to meet. I almost said no. But something inside me, some small stubborn spark, said yes. He suggested dinner at a restaurant downtown. When I looked it up, my stomach twisted. It was the kind of place where the cheapest appetizer cost more than my entire weekly grocery budget. I typed out a polite refusal, but then deleted it. Maybe he just liked the atmosphere. Maybe we'd just have a drink. Maybe he wouldn't even notice what I ordered, so I agreed. And that's how I found myself standing outside the glowing glass doors of a restaurant that smelled like butter and money, wearing a dress that I had dyed myself. The dress had once been beige, but I'd soaked it in cheap red dye until it took on a deep, uneven crimson. It wasn't perfect. Some threads still showed where the color hadn't quite taken, but it was all I had. And red made me feel braver, like maybe I could be someone else for a night. I had polished my shoes until the scuffs almost disappeared. My hair was loose, brushed until it shone faintly under the streetlight. I had dabbed on lipstick just a little, praying it would last. And with my $10 tucked tightly in my purse, I whispered to the cracked mirror before leaving, "You can do this. Just for one night. You can pretend." Inside, the restaurant glowed with golden light. The sound of laughter, the clinking of glasses, the low murmur of wealth hung in the air. Waiters in crisp white shirts floated between tables, balancing trays of wine and plates dressed like works of art. For a moment, I wanted to run. Everything in me screamed that I didn't belong here, that I was just a girl in a dyed dress and patched shoes, sitting among people who probably carried more cash in their wallets than I'd made in a month, but I forced my feet forward. The hostess smiled politely. "Good evening. Do you have a reservation?" "I'm meeting someone," I said quickly. "Michael." He said he'd be wearing a blue shirt. She glanced at her list, then gestured gracefully. "Of course. Right this way." My table was small, intimate, tucked near the center of the room. A single candle flickered in a glass holder. I sat down, carefully smoothing the fabric of my dress over my knees. My heart hammered in my chest. I checked my phone again. The last message from him was clear. "See you at 7. I'll be the guy in a blue shirt." It was already 7:10. No message. The waiter approached, smiling. "Would you like to start with a drink? Just—" "Water, please." My voice cracked. Water was safe. Water was free. Water wouldn't expose me. As the minutes ticked by, I tried to busy myself with my phone, scrolling through old messages, pretending I was important. But then I felt it, eyes, someone watching me. I lifted my gaze just enough, and that's when I saw him. At the table across from mine sat a man. He looked to be in his mid-30s, dressed in a tailored gray suit that fit him effortlessly. His dark hair was neatly combed back, his jawline sharp, his presence commanding in a way that made him stand out even in a room full of powerful people. But he wasn't alone. Beside him sat a boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old, with a head full of messy brown hair and the kind of focus only children had. The boy was coloring on a kid's menu with crayons, his tongue peeking from the corner of his mouth in concentration. Every so often he'd glance up at the man, grin, then return to his masterpiece. The man, though, wasn't focused on the boy. He was looking at me. At first I thought I was imagining it. I shifted in my chair, glanced away, then risked another look. His gaze was steady, curious, not judgmental, not pitying, just present. Heat rose to my cheeks. I ducked my head, pretending to study my phone, but it happened again. Every time I lifted my eyes, even for a second, I caught his. And every time he didn't look away. My stomach twisted. Why was he watching me? Was it obvious I didn't belong here? Could he tell I had nothing but $10 to my name? I forced myself to breathe, to focus on the candle, on the hope that Michael would walk through those doors any second. But he didn't. 7:30 came. Then 7:40. The empty chair across from me stayed empty. My phone stayed silent. The realization settled over me like a storm cloud. I had been stood up. Shame burned in my chest. I had dressed up. I had believed. I had risked what little pride I had left. And for what? To sit alone in a restaurant where everyone else seemed to be laughing, eating, living. The waiter came again, his smile a little thinner now. Would you like to order something? My throat tightened. I opened my purse, staring at the $10 inside. $10 in a place where a salad cost $15. I'll just wait a little longer, I whispered. He nodded politely, but I saw it in his eyes. Pity. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes. I blinked them away, refusing to let them fall. Not here, not in front of these strangers. Not in front of the man in the gray suit who kept watching me. And then, just as I was about to gather my things and flee, I heard a voice. Excuse me. I froze. Slowly I looked up. It was him, the man in the gray suit. He had stood, and now stood beside my table, his hand resting lightly on the chair. His expression was gentle, his eyes steady. I couldn't help but notice, he said softly. You've been waiting a long time. Is everything all right? My lips parted, but no sound came. He tilted his head, his smile faint but kind. Would you mind if I sat down? In that moment, my heart pounded so loud I thought the whole restaurant could hear it. And I had no idea that this man, the stranger in the gray suit, with the curious eyes and the little boy at his side, was a CEO. I had no idea he was a single dad, carrying his own burdens. All I knew was that the night I thought would end in humiliation was only just beginning. The man's voice was warm, gentle, and oddly grounding. You've been waiting a long time, he said, his tone neither pitying nor judgmental, simply kind. Is everything all right? For a moment I froze. My throat went dry. I didn't want him to see the truth, that I had been stood up, humiliated, and left clinging to a $10 bill as if it were a lifeline. So I smiled weakly, trying to mask the ache inside me. I'm fine, just waiting. He tilted his head slightly, his eyes narrowing with a sharpness that told me he didn't believe me. His son, a small boy with bright hazel eyes and the same sharp cheekbones as his father, peeked around from his seat. Dad, the boy whispered loudly. She looks sad. Heat rushed to my face. I forced another smile, this one even more fragile than the first. Kids notice everything, don't they? I said softly. The man chuckled, a sound that seemed to vibrate deep in his chest. He extended a hand. I'm David. I stared at his hand for a beat before shaking it. His grip was firm but not overpowering, reassuring. I'm Emma, I replied. Emma, he repeated, as if testing how the name felt on his tongue. Would you like to join us? You've been sitting here with an empty glass for a while, and I'd hate for good company to go to waste. My stomach twisted. Join them? With what money? Even the cheapest dish on the menu cost more than the $10 in my purse. Oh no, I said quickly, shaking my head. I don't want to intrude. I'm sure you and your son are enjoying your evening, but his son tugged on his sleeve. Dad, can she please sit with us, please? The boy's wide eyes softened something inside me. I glanced back at my table, at the untouched glass of water that seemed to mock me. then back at David's inviting expression. "Just for a little while," I whispered, more to myself than to him. He smiled and gestured to the empty seat beside his son. Then it settled. I slid into the chair, my heart racing. The boy beamed at me. "I'm Jacob," he said proudly. "Hi, Jacob," I replied. "Nice to meet you." As I settled in, David subtly caught the waiter's attention. The man approached, pad in hand. "Bring us another plate," David said smoothly, not even glancing at me. "And some extra bread, please." The word struck me. He hadn't asked what I wanted. He hadn't given me the chance to protest. He'd simply handled it, as though he'd done this dance before, offering help without making it look like charity. When the waiter left, I leaned toward him. "You didn't have to do that." His eyes met mine, steady and calm. "I know. But I wanted to." I looked away, my cheeks burning. Jacob began chattering about his favorite video games, his school, and how he hated broccoli but loved pizza. His innocence made me laugh, the sound surprising even me. "You're good with kids," David observed, his gaze thoughtful. I shrugged. "I used to babysit a lot in high school. And, well, kids are easier to be around sometimes. They don't judge." His expression shifted, just slightly, but I caught it. A shadow flickered across his face before he hid it behind a faint smile. The waiter returned with warm bread and a steaming dish of pasta. The aroma filled the air, making my stomach growl audibly. I froze, embarrassed, but David said nothing. Instead, he casually broke a piece of bread and set it on my plate. "Eat," he said softly. "No one should sit at a dinner table hungry." I hesitated, then finally gave in. The first bite was heavenly, rich and comforting. For a while, the three of us ate in easy silence, Jacob filling the gaps with his lively chatter. It felt normal, almost like a family. Then David spoke. "So Emma, what brings you here tonight?" The dreaded question. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. I couldn't tell him the truth, not the whole truth. That I'd been stood up on a blind date. That I was broke and desperate enough to pin my hopes on a stranger. So I gave him half the truth. "A friend suggested I come here. Thought it might be good for me to get out of the house." His eyes lingered on mine, searching, as though he could see through the thin veil of my words. But he didn't press. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "the best things happen when plans don't go the way we expect." I raised an eyebrow. "You sound like you speak from experience." He gave a short laugh, though it lacked humor. "You could say that. Life hasn't exactly followed the map I drew for myself." Jacob had grown quiet, busy with his pasta. David glanced at him, then back at me. "I lost my wife 5 years ago," he said softly. "Since then, it's just been me and Jacob. Business keeps me busy, but at the end of the day, he's my world." The raw honesty in his voice startled me. He barely knew me, yet he'd opened a window into his life. "I'm sorry," I whispered. He nodded. "Thank you." People don't usually know what to say. Sometimes silence is kinder than empty words. For a long moment I simply looked at him. Beneath the sharp suit and commanding presence, he was human, wounded, vulnerable, yet strong enough to keep going for his son. Something in me shifted. Maybe we weren't so different after all. We finished dinner, and when the waiter brought the check, my chest tightened again. I knew I couldn't contribute. Before I could fumble for excuses, David smoothly handed over his card without a second glance. "Thank you for letting us join you," I said, my voice small. He shook his head. "No, thank you for joining us. You made this evening brighter for both of us." Jacob grinned, his mouth still full of bread. "Yeah, you should come again." I laughed, but inside fear and hope collided. This was dangerous territory. I couldn't afford to dream, couldn't afford to believe that this moment could mean more. Yet when David walked me outside and the cool night air brushed against my skin, he turned to me with a sincerity that made my chest ache. "Emma," he said, "sometimes the people who seem to have the least actually carry the most strength. Don't let anyone make you forget that." I swallowed hard, my eyes stinging. He didn't know my story. He didn't know about the $10 in my purse. But somehow his words pierced right through me. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen. And in that moment, standing under the glow of the street lamp, I realized my life might be on the edge of something I had never dared to imagine. For the next few days, I couldn't stop replaying that dinner in my mind. The warmth of Jacob's laugh, the kindness in David's eyes, the way his words had lingered with me long after we'd parted. Sometimes the people who seem to have the least actually carry the most strength, but reality was quick to remind me of its grip. My landlord had left another notice on my door reminding me that rent was overdue. My boss at the cafe had cut my hours again, and the $10 I had clung to so tightly was already gone, spent on groceries. That barely lasted the week. It was foolish. To think about David, he was a man who lived in a world of power suits and private cars. A world where dinner bills were signed off without a second thought. I lived in a cramped apartment where the pipes rattled and the heat barely worked in winter. Still, when my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number, my heart skipped. "It's David. I hope you don't mind that I asked the waiter for your contact info." Jacob insisted I should. He'd like to see you again. I stared at the screen, torn between a rush of excitement and a flood of doubt. Should I respond? Would it be reckless? Would I end up humiliating myself even more by stepping into a life I didn't belong to? But then another message arrived. No pressure. Maybe coffee sometime? Jacob won't stop talking about you. I smiled despite myself. It wasn't a date. It wasn't glamorous. Just coffee. And if Jacob wanted to see me again, how could I say no? I typed back quickly before I could overthink. Sure. Coffee sounds nice. The next Saturday morning, I found myself at a cozy cafe near the park. This time I'd worn my simplest outfit, a plain blouse and jeans. I didn't want to look like I was trying too hard. I also didn't want to reveal that this cafe's cheapest coffee would take a painful bite out of what little money I had left. David was already there, sitting by the window with Jacob beside him. When Jacob spotted me, his face lit up. "Emma!" he shouted, nearly knocking over his juice as he waved. I laughed and walked over. "Hey, buddy." David stood politely as I arrived. "Glad you could make it," he said, and for the briefest moment, his smile looked almost shy. We sat together, and Jacob immediately launched into a story about his soccer practice. I listened, laughing at his animated hand gestures and sound effects. It felt so natural, so easy. When the waiter came, I hesitated before ordering just a small black coffee. David noticed, of course, he noticed everything, but he didn't comment. Instead, he ordered pastries for the table, pushing the plate toward me when they arrived. "Jacob can't finish all of these on his own," he said lightly. Jacob grinned. "Yes, I can." I broke off a piece of croissant, trying not to look too grateful. After coffee, Jacob begged to go to the park across the street. David raised an eyebrow at me. "Do you have time?" I should have said no. I had laundry waiting at home, job applications half filled on my desk, and a constant sense of urgency clawing at my chest. But when Jacob looked at me with those hopeful eyes, I couldn't resist. "Sure," I said softly. "I have time." The park was alive with the sounds of children laughing, dogs barking, and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Jacob ran ahead to the swings, and David and I followed at a slower pace. "You're good with him," David said after a moment. I shrugged. "He's a great kid. Easy to like. Not everyone would say that," David admitted. "Some people avoid single parents. They think the baggage is too much." His honesty disarmed me again. "He's not baggage," I said firmly. "He's your son." "That makes him a blessing," David glanced at me, his eyes softening. Not many people would see it that way. For a while, we stood in silence, watching Jacob pump his legs on the swing, laughing as he soared higher. Then David said, almost reluctantly, "You remind me of someone I used to know. Someone who believed in people the way you do." "Who?" I asked. "My wife," he said quietly. The words hung in the air, fragile and heavy all at once. I didn't know what to say, so I simply touched his arm lightly, a silent acknowledgement of his loss. He gave me a small smile, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was intruding in his world. I felt connected. Over the next few weeks, we met several more times. Sometimes for coffee, sometimes at the park, once even at a small bookstore where Jacob picked out a pile of comic books and begged me to read them with him. Each time the bond between us grew stronger, and each time I wrestled with the same internal conflict. I liked David more than I wanted to admit. His kindness disarmed me. His strength inspired me. His vulnerability touched me. But I was still just the girl with $10 in her purse. He didn't know that I skipped meals to stretch my groceries. He didn't know that my shoes had holes in the soles or that I counted coins before boarding the bus. He didn't know, and I was terrified of him finding out. One evening, after walking Jacob to their car, David lingered as the boy climbed inside. He turned to me, his expression serious. "Emma, can I ask you something?" "Of course," he hesitated. "Are you okay?" "Really okay?" The question cut deep. My first instinct was to nod, to smile, to pretend. But something in his eyes, so steady, so sincere, made me falter. "I'm fine," I said. But the words came out too quickly, too shallow. He tilted his head. "You don't have to pretend with me." I looked away, swallowing hard. I don't want to be a burden." "You could never be a burden," he said firmly. The intensity in his voice startled me. For a moment, I let myself imagine what it would feel like to lean on him, to let someone else carry the weight I had shouldered for so long. But reality snapped back. I couldn't let him see the cracks. If he knew the truth, he might pity me, and pity was unbearable, so I forced a smile. "Thanks, David, but I'm fine." He didn't believe me. I could see it in his eyes. But he didn't push. Instead, he simply said, "If you ever need anything at all, I want you to know you can ask." My chest ached. No one had ever said that to me before. That night, back in my tiny apartment, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. My heart was tangled in a mess of emotions I couldn't sort out. I liked David. I cared about Jacob. I felt alive in their presence in a way I hadn't felt in years. But I also knew my place. I wasn't a woman of wealth or status. I wasn't polished or refined. I was the girl who had shown up to a blind date with only $10 to her name. And yet, when David looked at me, it felt like he saw more than that. It terrified me. It thrilled me. It made me wonder if, for the first time in my life, I was standing at the edge of something real. The weeks turned into months, and what started as chance encounters slowly began to feel like a rhythm. Coffee with David, afternoons at the park with Jacob, evenings when we'd wander through bookstores or share quiet conversations while Jacob ran ahead. For the first time in years, I wasn't surviving, I was living, and yet the fear never left me. I knew the truth would catch up to me eventually. The notices on my door had turned into warnings. My manager at the cafe was threatening to cut me entirely, and the $10 girl I was inside still clung desperately to every penny. I hid it as best I could, but David wasn't a fool. He had the sharp instincts of a man who'd built an empire from the ground up. He could see through people, and I knew, sooner or later, he'd see through me. That moment came one rainy evening. I had just finished a long shift at the cafe, soaked to the bone after walking home without an umbrella. My building's landlord was waiting at the steps, arms crossed. "Emma," he barked, "I can't wait anymore. If you don't have the rent by tomorrow, you're out. Do you understand?" I nodded, my throat tight, unable to form words. When I finally reached my apartment, dripping wet and trembling, I collapsed on the thin mattress that served as my bed. My phone buzzed. "A message from David, dinner tomorrow? Jacob's been begging to see you again." I stared at the screen, torn apart inside. How could I sit across from them, smiling, pretending, when my entire life was on the verge of collapse? For the first time, I didn't respond. The next evening, I was at the cafe wiping down tables when I heard the door chime. I glanced up and froze. David stood there, his suit damp from the rain, his expression unreadable. "Emma," he said softly. My heart thudded painfully. "David, what are you doing here?" "You didn't answer my message. My voice faltered. "I've been busy." His eyes swept the empty cafe, the peeling paint on the walls, the exhaustion etched into my face. And in that instant I knew. He saw everything. "Emma," he said again, more gently this time. "Why didn't you tell me?" The tears came before I could stop them. I turned away ashamed. "Because I didn't want you to look at me differently." I didn't want to be some charity case in your perfect world. I felt his hand on mine, warm and steady. Look at me. I shook my head, but he tipped my chin until my eyes met his. You think I care about money? He asked, his voice fierce. Emma, I've seen people with millions who are empty inside. And I've seen people with nothing who have more strength and beauty than they realize. I swallowed hard, my chest aching. But I don't belong in your world. His gaze softened. Maybe it's my world that doesn't belong without you. The words undid me. The walls I had built crumbled, and I broke down, sobbing into his chest as he held me, strong and steady, like an anchor in the storm. From that night on, things changed. David didn't try to fix everything for me. He respected my pride too much for that. But he didn't let me push him away either. Instead, he found small ways to be there, dropping by the cafe with Jacob, inviting me to dinners that felt more like family than formality, walking me home in the evening so I wouldn't be alone. Slowly, I began to let him in. I told him about the nights I'd gone hungry, about the jobs I'd juggled, about the weight of carrying everything on my own, and in return, he told me about the crushing loneliness after his wife's death, about the nights Jacob cried himself to sleep, about the fear of being both mother and father in a world that expected him to be unbreakable. We became each other's safe place. One evening, months later, David invited me and Jacob to a small gathering at his home. It was nothing extravagant, just a quiet dinner with close friends. But for me, stepping into his world so openly was terrifying. I wore my best dress, the same red one I'd worn on that first blind date, the one I had dyed myself. I thought I looked decent until I stepped into the room filled with polished women in designer gowns. I shrank back, ready to flee. But then David appeared at my side. He slipped his hand into mine, his grip reassuring. "You're beautiful," he whispered. I wanted to argue, to tell him I didn't belong here, but the way he looked at me silenced every doubt. That night, as Jacob fell asleep on the couch, David walked me to the balcony overlooking the city lights. "Emma," he said quietly, "do you remember the night we first met? You were sitting at that table waiting for someone who never came." I laughed softly, though it still stung. How could I forget? His hand tightened around mine. He didn't show up because he wasn't meant to. I was, my breath caught. "David!" He turned to me, his eyes shining with something that made my heart race. "I don't care about your past, your money, or where you came from. What matters is who you are. And Emma, you are the strongest, most genuine woman I've ever met." Tears blurred my vision. "I don't know if I can be who you need me to be," he smiled gently. "You already are." And before I could respond, his lips were on mine, soft, certain, filled with every unspoken word we'd both been afraid to say. From that moment, everything shifted. Life didn't magically become perfect. I still worked hard, still struggled in ways David could never fully understand. But I wasn't alone anymore. I had Jacob's laughter, David's steady presence, and for the first time in my life, I had hope. Months later, as we sat together at that same restaurant where it had all begun, David raised a glass and smiled at me. "To chance meetings," he said. I smiled back, my heart full. "To $10, I teased. He laughed, and Jacob, now sitting proudly between us, lifted his juice. "To family." And in that moment, I realized the truth. Sometimes, the smallest things, the last $10 in your purse, the courage to show up even when you're afraid, can lead you to everything you never knew you were searching for.